Every time I try to record, people just drive by. It's like, do I have a flashing light that says we're recording? Hello and welcome back to Tabletop Archives, where I, Frank, give you world building tips for your own custom worlds. Nailed it. Today we're going to be talking about pantheons and how to create the gods that fit inside of them. Much like any other world building, pantheons are an important part of it, as long as you make it an important part of it. The gods can simply just be there because there's a cleric in the party and they need to worship a god, or the gods can be so impactful that the entire society revolves around them. Whichever the case is, more than likely you're going to need to have some sort of god or spiritual aspect to your D&D campaign, and I'm here to help you figure that out. Just for clarification, I'm going to be using the term god to represent god and goddesses just because it's easier than saying god and goddesses, so yeah. Before we get started in actually building the gods and the pantheons and whatever domains they're going to be residing over, we need to talk about themes. Now, when I'm mentioning themes, I'm talking about the regional aspects of your setting. We're talking about the societal and cultural understandings of how your setting works. I always recommend that you start world building with a theme in mind. It helps to facilitate your world building a lot better. It helps you to just really focus in and create a world that is revolving around something. The theme could be something as simple as post-apocalyptic. It could be just high fantasy. It can also be much more specific, such as freedom versus security, or technology versus magic. Figure out what your themes are, and the gods will start to come up. You'll start to understand what aspects of these themes the people are going to be worshiping. For example, if you, geographically speaking, are in a series of islands, it makes sense that your characters are probably going to be worshiping a god of travel. They're going to be praying to that god, perhaps doing some sort of ceremony or ritual or sacrifice in hopes of appeasing the god so that they can safely get to the next island. If we're talking about these tensions or bigger themes like freedom versus security, you're probably going to have gods that fall on one end of those spectrums, in between, anywhere in that. For example, a god of protection is going to fall more on the security aspect of it, versus a god of the arts is probably going to fall more on the freedom aspect. Find those themes, whatever they are, geographically, culturally. Find them and start building the gods around that. But even before you start building the gods, you're going to probably start getting some ideas of like, this is a god that should be a thing, this is a god. Once you start to get into that mindset, start thinking about what type of pantheon you're going to be using. Now I know what you're thinking, Frank, there's only one type of pantheon. It's the pantheon. Yes, and when I'm saying what type of pantheon, I'm talking more of the structure of it. In normal mythology, we look at a pantheon as having a figurehead and several other gods that serve under that figurehead. This is true in Greek, Norse, Egyptian, and various other mythologies that have that same structure to it. But you might not want to do that. You might want to do something else. So I recommend still look at your themes, look at what you're trying to say with this setting, with this world, and go from there. For example, in our freedom versus security example, it might make more sense that instead of having a pantheon where they go throughout the entirety of it, you might only have 2 to 3 gods. A god that's harsh on freedom, harsh on security, and one in the middle. You might only have 2 gods. You might go dualism with it. The idea that it's this god versus this god and they're battling it out. That creates an interesting narrative point where your players are going to have to pick a side. Do we serve this god or neither of them? You could have one god that's kind of like multiple gods in one, such like as the Trinity in real life or the 7 in Game of Thrones. Perhaps there is multiple gods, but they're not all served under and worshipped under by the same people. Maybe there's a god per each city, and people are trying to fight it, much like in the ancient Mediterranean. Find what your themes are, what your understanding of the societies and cultures and geography are, and start to understand, are we having this 3 in 1 figure? Are we having dualism where it's 2 gods fighting each other? Or are we going to do the pantheon? Now, if you are deciding to do a pantheon, I would recommend having that figurehead that kind of serves the Zeus, the Odin, the Ra. Have that figurehead and then branch out from there. My next tip is going to be figuring out what domains your gods serve under. And that has to do with, don't feel like you need a god for each individual domain. Do not. Because trust me, you're going to have to keep creating them because Wizards is never going to stop making subclasses. They're never going to. So instead of coming up with a new god and then having to find an explanation for why that new god suddenly existed the whole time, or that new god miraculously showed up. Have gods be the god of multiple things. So going back to our god of travel example in a tropical island setting, that god might also be the god of the sea, which makes sense. That's the main way they travel. Now take traveling and put it in a desert setting. Suddenly the god isn't going to be the god of the sea because most people are going to be traveling through sand dunes and deserts. Perhaps the god of travel in this desert environment is also the god of the sun because it's just beaming down on you and you're hoping that the god will show you mercy by not killing you before you get there. It also changes vastly how you view the two gods. In the tropical setting, they might see the god of travel as more as a benevolent, merciful figure that mostly usually gets people to where they want. Versus in the desert setting, more people are going to see it as a harsh god that you better make sure you do what's right or else you die. In the freedom versus security example, we talked about a god of art being on the freedom side and a god of protection being on the security side. Let's dig a little deeper into that. If a god of protection is on security, what is another thing that makes people feel secure? Cities and laws. So suddenly, this god of protection is also the god of civilization and the god of laws. Well, if it's the god of civilization on the opposite end, clearly this god serving freedom is going to be more outdoors and agricultural based. So where it is the god of music, it's also the god of the harvest or the god of agriculture. Now, not only do you have two different gods who are at odds with each other, but it even makes sense as to why they're at odds with each other because their domains do not work well together. My next tips involves making sure the gods relate to each other, that they have these bonds and these understandings with each other of how they interact. We've already talked about in our dualism example of the freedom god and the security god just clashing with each other, but take it a few steps deeper. Are they siblings that don't get along? Are they lovers that are bound away from each other because of the people who worship them? Were they once one entity that split into two and now can't reform? What is the relationship between those two gods? Figure that out and start to understand how that can influence the worship and the domains they use and various other aspects of that. You'll notice in a lot of modern day pantheons, going back to that example, most of them tend to be like brother of this person, son of that person, daughter of this, wife to this. They're all connected and interwoven. And that's okay. It's good to have that aspect. It's nice to know that the gods are interacting with each other much like we people would as well. That might even create fun dichotomies where one player serves one god and another player serves another god, and maybe those two gods don't get along in the mythology. Maybe they do get along, and for some reason people have misconstrued the fact that they actually get along. Find ways these gods relate to each other, whether they get along or don't, and it's going to start to flesh out your pantheon a lot more. And that's going to lead me to my last example. Have some evil gods. Just have gods that are just evil for the sake of being evil. Sure, you can flesh out their motivations more, but make them evil. Everyone likes fighting an evil god. Or serving one. Or serving one. For example, if we're talking Norse mythology, Loki is the son of Odin, brother to Thor, and he tries to destroy the world multiple times. And succeeds. It's good to have that one god that everyone can look at and be like, look, they're doing evil things, we don't like them. Perhaps you have a god that wasn't evil, but ruled over the domain of something that is considered evil, and people ostracize them. And suddenly now they're like, well, if you think I'm evil, I'm going to be evil. Most people have that understanding of Hades. Oh, he's the god of the underworld. He must be horrible. Now he's actually a pretty chill dude. I mean, he does kidnap Persephone, but if we're just going to nitpick about the Greeks and their gods, all of them are horrible. Zeus is far worse than Hades, man. Find an evil god, or two, or three, or however many you want that goes against the gods that everyone else serves, but maybe they're a duality, a coin flip of it. For example, if you're serving the god of light and order, maybe the inverse of that is the god of chaos and darkness. If you can find a way to make your evil gods fit into whatever themes you're doing, because either they're the opposite or they fit into that spectrum like we were talking about, good. Do that. It's going to make it seem like you have so much more planned. It's going to make the players feel like you were really thinking about this. You've planned everything out. So that's pretty much it. You really want to start with the foundation of a theme of what your setting is trying to create and build. And then from there, you can start to understand what type of pantheon you're going to do, how you want to structure that pantheon, what gods and domains that fall into that, how you can combine gods into one entity and rather than having several, how the gods relate to each other, whether that's because they hate each other, they're adversarial, or their family. Once you have this foundation that is your theme, you're going to find that building a pantheon is much easier than building one from scratch or thinking you need to have a storm god because, gosh dang it, there's a storm god in that setting. Now, I know I didn't go over like specific examples of like what do we name a pantheon or anything like that. If you want to see that, please let me know in the comments below. I would actually love to go over like just fun creating a pantheon from scratch that anyone can use. Outside of that, if you like this video, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Please tell your friends. We're doing cool. I'm glad that people are still watching my videos, but if you can share it, we'd really appreciate it. And by we, I mean, it's just me. It's only just me. And I'll see you next time.